Melissa closed the door behind her son Andrew, who was leaving for college, and felt a strange mixture of pride and emptiness. Her son was the last one to leave the house, and now she was left alone in a spacious house where her children's voices had always sounded before. Lauren's eldest daughter had left 6 months ago, and now the moment Melissa had dreaded the most had arrived: silence. She walked through the rooms as if trying to keep at least the memories left in these walls. In the kitchen, everything was as usual. Her husband Richard's cup was in place, the stove remained clean, and the calendar on the refrigerator was still a reminder of old events. Their marriage lasted 25 years, filled with shared joys and difficulties. But now it all seemed so far away, as if it had happened in another life. Melissa sighed and sat down on a chair. She realized that her whole life revolved around children, and now this meaning has disappeared. The next day, a friend suggested that we meet for coffee. Lisa, her old friend, has always been active and energetic. When they sat down at a table in a cozy cafe, Lisa immediately noticed Melissa's mood. "You look tired, Mel. Everything is fine?" Melissa began, shaking her head. "The house is empty, the children have left. Richard, as always, is constantly working. I'm just losing myself and I don't know what to do now." Lisa thought about it, then smiled. "I have an idea. Try the gym. It's so refreshing. I've been going there for 2 years now. Training isn't just about the body, it's about feeling in control." Melissa looked at her friend skeptically, but after a couple of days she signed up for a fitness club. She chose the early morning time, hoping that there would be fewer people. On the first day, she felt insecure, as if she was trespassing on someone else's territory. Young girls and men worked on simulators, lifting weights easily. Melissa tried to get used to it, but quickly got tired and returned home thinking that maybe it wasn't for her. However, she returned the next day. And the next one. Slowly, step by step, she began to get used to it. The instructor advised her to start with simple exercises, and she was surprised to notice that she even liked it. After a few weeks, classes became her morning routine. She got up before Richard, left the house quietly so as not to wake him, and spent an hour in the gym. After a few months of training, Melissa's body began to change. At first, she noticed that the jeans began to fit differently, then that she had muscles on her arms. Her skin looked healthier, and in the mirror she saw a man she had almost forgotten, a youthful, energetic woman. But the most important thing is that a long-lost fire has awakened inside. She began to feel a confidence in herself that she hadn't felt in years. One morning, she lingered by the mirror in the hall. A man studying nearby caught her eye. He smiled at her, and she suddenly found herself pleasantly offended. She quickly turned away, but that forgotten feeling remained, that someone had noticed her again. At home, Richard met her over a cup of coffee. He looked tired, his tie was slightly twisted, and his laptop took up the entire table. "You're back early," he said without looking up from the screen. "Yes, the workout was shorter today," Melissa replied, pouring herself a glass of water. "How's your job?" "Loaded as usual. How are you doing?" She thought about what to say. She wanted to tell him about her successes, about how she feels beautiful again, but instead she just said, "It's all right." This short conversation only made her realize that there was a gap between them. Previously, they could spend hours discussing everything that happened in their lives, but now their conversations have been reduced to routine phrases. A few weeks later, Melissa signed up for an evening program. It was a dance class that her instructor recommended as a way to improve her flexibility. She hesitated for a long time but decided to try anyway. On the first evening, she stood in front of the mirror in the hall, listening to the rhythm of the music. The instructor, an energetic young man named Zach, showed the basic movements. "Relax, move to the music, feel the rhythm," he said, and Melissa, hesitantly at first, began to repeat the movements. Her body gradually adjusted to the rhythm, and she suddenly smiled at her reflection. It was fun. When the lesson ended, Zach approached her. "You did a great job for the first time. Come back," he said, and she felt something warm flare up in her chest. At home, Richard was sitting at his laptop again, but this time he noticed her. Her face was glowing and he couldn't help but notice it. "You look good," he remarked, looking up from his work. "Thank you," she replied shortly, feeling mixed emotions, and went into the shower. Water was running down her shoulders, but her mind was racing. Had he noticed how she had changed? Or is his interest caused only by external changes? She remembered how before Richard could not just notice her, but sincerely admire her, speak words that touched her to the depths of her soul. And now his remarks seemed only fleeting. After getting out of the shower, Melissa looked in the mirror, lingering on her reflection. She had really changed, slim, toned, with a sparkle in her eyes that had long been lost. But inside, the feeling grew that it wasn't enough. She wanted more, not only to see her reflection in the mirror but also to feel that someone really sees her, hears her, understands her. At home, the silence became more and more noticeable. Richard went back to his office, engrossed in another project. He has always been immersed in his work, especially in recent years. Melissa was sitting on the couch, thoughtfully going through the photos on her phone. Her gaze stopped at a recent picture from the audience, where she was smiling, surrounded by other members of the dance class. The picture evoked warm feelings. She remembered how Zach had cheered her up in class, how easily he'd found the words to make her smile. These lessons had become more than just a hobby for her. She felt that she was noticed there, she was important there. When Richard came out of the office, she looked at him automatically. "You look good," he repeated, looking at her a little longer than usual. "Thank you," she replied with a brief smile, but inside the same question remained. What exactly does he see? Her changed body or a woman who had found herself again? Melissa felt a quiet longing flare up inside her. She knew she wanted more attention, more emotions, more life. And maybe not just from Richard. Melissa was sitting in the empty living room, holding a glass of wine in her hands, which, as if out of habit, she began to pour herself more and more often over the past weeks. She felt like this little hobby was turning into a way to distract herself from the growing sense of emptiness. It was almost midnight, and Richard, as always, continued to work in his office at home, immersed in endless reports and calls. His work had long been a part of their lives, but now it seemed to be alienating them more and more. She automatically ran her finger along the rim of the glass, thinking about the latest events. After the dance class, where Zach turned his attention to her again, Melissa felt strangely excited and anxious at the same time. I remembered the moment when he lightly touched her shoulder, correcting her movement. The gesture was almost imperceptible, but its warmth reverberated through her entire body. Her heart started beating faster when she thought about him, and it was frightening. A knock on the door startled her out of her thoughts. She got up and headed for the door, not expecting anyone at such a late hour. When she opened it, she saw Lisa with a bottle of wine in her hands. "I've decided that you need company," her friend said with a smile. "May I come in?" Melissa stepped back to let her in. They sat down on the sofa and Lisa filled their glasses. "You look worried. Something happened?" Lisa looked at her carefully, as if trying to get into her thoughts. Melissa hesitated but decided to share it anyway. "Liz, I do not know what is happening to me. Zach. He's just a dance instructor, but I can't stop thinking about him." Lisa laughed, leaning back on the sofa. "It's natural, Mel. You've changed, you've become different. Attractive, confident. You're getting attention, and honestly, that's okay. But I'm married." Melissa cut her off abruptly, looking down into her glass. "So what? Are you happy?" Lisa leaned forward, her voice becoming more serious. "When was the last time Richard complimented you? When did he look at you the way you deserve?" Melissa didn't say anything. She knew Lisa was right, but it was too painful to admit it to herself. The next day she went back to the gym. There was silence, interrupted only by the sounds of music and the noise of exercise equipment. Zach noticed her immediately. He came over, smiling, and suggested that we start with a warm-up. For an hour, Zach was there, helping, supporting, and sometimes joking. At some point, when he was helping her cope with a new exercise, their hands touched. Melissa felt her heart skip a beat. Zach held his gaze, and at that moment, something invisible but tangible appeared between them. After practice, Melissa headed for the exit, but Zach called out to her. "Melissa, wait. You've been looking great lately." She stopped, turning around. His words made her smile, but at the same time, conflict flared up in her soul. "Thanks, Zach. It means a lot to me," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. But she was seething. She felt wanted, and it was too strong a feeling to ignore. Melissa barely returned home after the words that Zach said. She felt trapped in a whirlpool of feelings and thoughts that wouldn't let her rest. Richard's voice rang in her head, his usual indifferent "good evening," and Zach's hot gaze, full of admiration and desire, immediately surfaced. When she opened the door, Richard was sitting in his usual position at the kitchen table with a laptop, intently typing data into a spreadsheet. "You're late," he said without taking his eyes off the screen. "Yes, I was a little late after training," Melissa replied shortly, taking off her coat. Her voice sounded calmer than she felt. Richard just nodded, and the silence that had always surrounded them for the past few months returned. Melissa quickly went into the bedroom, keeping her emotions to herself. She was looking in the mirror, seeing the reflection of a woman who had recently been just a wife and mother. Now it was her, the new Melissa, confident, attractive, but at the same time completely lost in her feelings. The next day, Zach suggested a meeting before morning practice. Melissa hesitated but eventually agreed. They met in a cozy cafe, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with a slight smell of cinnamon. Zach was sitting at a corner table looking relaxed, but there was a slight tension in his gaze. "I'm glad you came," he said, smiling. "I hope I didn't interrupt your day too much." Melissa smiled back, feeling her heart begin to beat faster. "No, it's okay. I'm even pleased to break out of the usual routine." They talked for a long time. Zach told stories about his travels, shared plans to open his own sports center. Melissa listened to him as if spellbound. It had been a long time since she had felt so interesting to someone so important. Her laughter sounded sincere, and she almost forgot about her husband Richard, who was probably sitting at home again, absorbed in work. When their conversation came to an end, Zach looked at her again in a way no one had looked at her in years. His gaze was warm but insistent. "Do you understand that I can't just ignore how I feel?" he said, gently touching her hand. Melissa felt her stomach turn over. She didn't know how to respond. Her mind screamed that this was wrong, that she shouldn't let these feelings develop. But the heart was too strong. "Zach, I do not know how to react to this," she finally said. "I'm married. I have a family." Zach leaned toward her a little, his voice quieter. "But are you happy? Do you really feel that your family is what keeps you alive? Or are you just existing?" These words hurt my heart. Melissa thought for a moment, unable to find an answer. Zach kept talking. "I'm not going to rush you. But know that I'm here. I want to be with you, I want you to be happy. You deserve it." She left the cafe, feeling that her life had begun to change. When she returned home, she found Richard at work again. He didn't even notice her coming in. At that moment, she realized that the gap between them had become too deep. A few days have passed. Melissa avoided contact with Zach, but his words wouldn't leave her mind. Her life turned into a chaos of conflicting feelings and thoughts. She tried to focus on home, on her usual duties, but her inner world was torn apart. One evening, when Richard had gone to bed earlier as usual, Melissa sat in the living room for a long time. She had a glass of wine in her hands, which she turned over, not noticing that it had been empty for a long time. Her phone was on the table, the screen flickering with incoming messages. Zach wrote to her asking how she was. She hesitated, but eventually typed in the answer. "Thank you for being here." She pressed send and immediately felt an alarming warmth spreading inside. It was the beginning of something new, something that would change her life forever. The next morning, as soon as Melissa woke up, she found a new message from Zach. "I'm leaving for Paris in a week. I want you to come with me. It's crazy, but I'm sure we deserve this chance." She stared at the screen in disbelief. Paris. The city she had dreamed of since her youth. It seemed like the offer was unbelievable and scary at the same time. She closed her eyes, trying to suppress the rising tide of emotion. Richard was in his office as usual. She wondered for a moment if he would notice her absence if she decided to leave. She wanted to talk to him, at least try to clarify her feelings, but he, absorbed in his work, once again looked distant and distant. "You look tired," he said suddenly without taking his eyes off the screen. "Is everything okay?" Melissa was fighting back tears. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied, quickly turning away. "I'm just a little tired." She spent the whole day thinking. Thoughts of Paris and Zach's words kept coming back like an annoying whisper. In the evening, after another workout, Zach approached her again. His eyes shone with hope. "Melissa, I'm serious. Paris is a chance for both of us. Just think about it." "I do not know if I can leave all this," she said, looking away evasively. Zach came closer, his voice softer. "What are you really leaving behind? The house that hasn't been yours for a long time? That person who doesn't even notice when you walk into a room? You deserve more than that, Melissa," he said in an urgent tone. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew he was right, but she was afraid to admit it to herself. In the evening, she sat in front of her laptop for a long time, opening the ticket booking page. Zach sent her a link where a seat had already been booked for her. All she had to do was click the confirm button. Her hand was shaking when she finally pressed the button. The ticket to Paris was issued. The next day, she carefully began to prepare for the trip. In the depths of the closet, Melissa found things she hadn't worn in a long time, elegant dresses that had once made her confident. She took out her suitcase and started packing, trying not to make too much noise. Richard didn't even notice her cooking. Melissa, already holding the suitcase in her hand, quietly closed the closet in the bedroom. She tried to move silently without attracting attention, but the sounds of the suitcase's wheels on the wooden floor betrayed her. Richard came out of the office with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Where are you going?" "What is it?" he asked, frowning. His voice was full of bewilderment and suspicion. Melissa felt her throat go dry. She knew this moment was inevitable, but she wasn't ready for such a direct question. "Get some rest and think," she began, avoiding his gaze. "I'm only going away for a few days." Richard set the mug down on the nearest shelf, his face serious, almost cold. "Do you think this is normal? Just leave without talking to me? We have problems and you've decided that the best way to solve them is to run away?" Melissa nervously squeezed the handle of the suitcase, trying to cope with the surging emotions. "It's not an escape," she said, looking at him. "I just need space to understand how I feel." Richard stepped closer, his eyes flashing with anger. "Space? Are you serious? We've been together for 25 years, we have children, we share a house, and now you're talking about space? Do you think I'm just going to sit and wait for you to figure it out?" His tone has become firmer. "If you leave, Melissa, know that I will start living my life too. Without you. I'm warning you." Her heart skipped a beat. These words sounded so sharp and final that she couldn't help but think. She had always perceived Richard as calm and submissive, but now he looked different, firm, determined. "And what does that mean?" "What is it?" she asked, raising her eyebrows slightly. "Do you want a divorce?" Richard sighed wearily. "I do not know what I want," he confessed. "But if you're willing to destroy everything for the sake of your quest, then maybe I should start looking for something new too. Or someone else." Those words hit Melissa like a cold shower. She knew that Richard didn't waste words, even if they were spoken in a fit of emotion. She looked down, feeling conflicting emotions tearing at her from the inside. Zach was waiting for her outside, and standing in front of her was Richard, the man she'd spent most of her life with. His angry determination suddenly reminded her of how he had been in their youth, strong, confident, and unyielding. "I need to leave, Richard. It's important to me," she finally said. "But I'll be back. We'll talk about it when I get back." "If you leave," he repeated, his voice almost a whisper, "there will be no need to discuss anything, remember?" Melissa felt her hands tremble. She looked into Richard's eyes, but he had already turned away, picking up his mug and heading back to the office. His back looked tense, as if he was holding back something more than anger. She took a few steps towards the door, feeling heavy inside. When she walked out the door and saw the car waiting for her, her heart sank again. Zach was standing by the car, leaning on the hood, his gaze calm but attentive. "Is everything okay?" "What is it?" he asked, noticing her confusion. Melissa nodded, even though everything inside her screamed the opposite. "Just let's go," she said, not looking back. As the car pulled away, she caught a glimpse of Richard's figure at the window. He stood watching her, his face a mixture of pain and anger. She knew that look would stay with her for a long time. Richard stood at the window for a long time, the sound of a car driving away from their house echoed in his head. For the first time in a long time he felt like he was alone. But instead of the usual melancholy, something new seized him, a mixture of anger and a strange, barely perceptible freedom. Richard decided not to let this feeling go out. He put down the cup of coffee he was still holding in his hands and went to his desk. But the work, which he usually found soothing, suddenly became unbearable. It seemed absurd to sit and type in numbers as if nothing had happened. "To hell with it," he muttered to himself and closed his laptop. He brewed himself a strong cup of coffee and began to remember what had once brought him joy. Flipping through old photos, he found pictures from fishing, which he adored even before work consumed all his time. In these pictures he looked much happier, with no signs of fatigue or disappointment. In the evening Richard went to the sports store. He bought a fishing rod, a set of gear, and even a good old box for fishing supplies. After returning home, he sat down at the table and began to prepare for the morning trip to the lake. While planning the route, he suddenly realized that he had not felt such excitement for a long time. At dawn, Richard was already standing at the water's edge. His fishing rod slid easily into the river, and the morning mist swirling over the water seemed to erase the weight of recent years from him. This morning was the beginning of his transformation. He started going out to the lake almost daily, getting to know other fishermen, chatting, joking, and even laughing. A few weeks later, one of his new friends, an elderly man named Mark, invited Richard to a barbecue. There he met a woman he hadn't seen in over 20 years. Emma. Back at university they were close, but their paths diverged. She looked even better now than he remembered her, confident, lively, with a sincere smile. Richard. Her voice sounded surprised but warm. I can't believe it's you. He froze, holding a plate of barely started steak in his hands. His heart seemed to skip a beat. Emma? He muttered, finally recognizing her. How many years have passed? They started talking. Emma talked about her life. I moved to a neighboring city, started my own interior design business, and got divorced a couple of years ago. Their conversation was light, as if they had returned to the days when they walked around the campus together. Emma laughed at his jokes, and Richard noticed how her laughter made him feel young again. From that evening on, Emma began to occupy more and more space in his thoughts. They began exchanging messages, sometimes meeting for coffee. She inspired him to resume not only fishing, but also his old hobby of photography. At some point, Richard noticed that he was no longer thinking about Melissa, her coldness or reproaches. One evening, sitting in his armchair with a book, he felt the vibration of his phone. A message from Emma. Do you want to go to the gallery tomorrow? There's an exhibition of nature photographs. I think you'll like it. Richard smiled and typed in a short answer, of course. I've wanted to see something like this for a long time. Emma became not only his inspiration, but also the quiet support he had been looking for a long time. Her caring and ease in communication reminded him of how he used to be, before all those years of routine marriage, work and everyday problems. When Melissa returned from Paris a few weeks later, she expected to see Richard the same way she had left him. Quiet, immersed in his work and completely lost in his emotions. But she was in for a shock. Richard wasn't at home when she came in with her suitcase. Instead, a note greeted her on the kitchen table. Don't wait for me. I have things to do. There's food in the fridge. It was so uncharacteristic of him that she couldn't help but feel alarmed. Later in the evening, when he returned, she saw a completely different person in front of her. Richard looked relaxed, even happy. His face had a hint of a slight tan and his clothes, stylish but informal, seemed new. Hi, he said, glancing at her. How was the trip? His voice was neutral, as if he really didn't care. It confused her. She expected reproaches, questions, accusations, but instead she received only mild indifference. Okay, she replied cautiously. And you? Has something changed? He chuckled, as if he didn't understand her question. You could say that. A lot of new stuff, he replied, pouring himself some water. You know, I started fishing. I also met an old friend. We're going to the exhibition tomorrow. Melissa froze. Richard's words sounded so casual, but there was something about them that made her heart flutter. He no longer seemed to her the submissive and predictable man she had left behind when she left for Paris. This new Richard caused her both surprise and alarm. But Melissa couldn't tell Richard that in Paris, instead of the euphoria of adventure, she felt a strange uneasiness. Questions swarmed in her head. Why did Paris, which she dreamed of so much, not bring happiness? Why did she feel like something important was eluding her? Zach was no longer there. His ringing laughter, compliments and charm, which at first captivated her, began to seem like something superficial. His charm began to fade, and she realized that his attention was just a bright splash, not something meaningful. After a week of staying at the hotel together, Zach left her a note on the bedside table, written in his elegant style. Thank you for the incredible days. You're amazing. Be happy. Melissa read these words over and over again, but instead of joy, she felt heavy. It seemed to her that now she was left alone, but not in a romantic, exciting loneliness, but in a frightening one. Zach left, Paris suddenly seemed alien, and thoughts of home began to gnaw at her from the inside. Melissa spent the rest of the trip alone, thinking about how everything went wrong. Paris, which she imagined as the beginning of a new, vibrant life, turned into emptiness. Zach turned out to be just an illusion, a flash in her gray routine, and her return home was a reminder that she had left a broken relationship. After assessing the situation, Melissa decided to take matters into her own hands and charm Richard again. She prepared carefully. She chose Richard's favorite dress, did makeup that accentuated her new appearance, and cooked dinner from his favorite dishes. She put their wedding glasses on the table, hoping that it would remind Richard of the best moments of their marriage. When Richard returned home, his gaze slid over her and lingered on the table. He looked surprised but not charmed. His habitual calmness, now tinged with a slight detachment, confused her. Dinner? This is unexpected, he said, taking off his jacket and throwing it over the back of a chair. I wanted to talk, she replied, inviting him to the table. About us. Richard sat down, poured himself a glass of water from the carafe, and looked at her with an expression of weariness. About what exactly? About how you decided to leave without telling me anything important. Or about how you left me alone to deal with what was left of our lives. Melissa sighed as she felt Richard's words pierce her defenses. I know I made a mistake, she began. I was confused. I was looking for something that I was missing, but I realized that I had made a huge mistake. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest, watching her with cold interest. A mistake. Do you call this a mistake? You abandoned me, our house, everything we built together. And now that you feel sick, do you want to come back? Well, that's convenient. That's not true, she protested, her voice trembling. I love you, Richard. I want to fix everything. Richard raised his hand to stop her. No, Melissa. You want to fix your guilt, not us. You came back because you realized that your little escape didn't give you what you were looking for. But that doesn't mean I have to accept you again. She felt her eyes fill with tears. His words were like a blow to the heart. But doesn't 25 years of marriage mean anything? We can start with a clean slate if you give me a chance. Richard stood up, his face a mixture of anger and determination. Do you think you can come here, dress up nicely, cook dinner, and I'll just forget about everything? He said, his voice getting tougher. You ruined what we had, Melissa. And there's nothing else that can be fixed. Melissa couldn't hold back her tears. She stood up, holding out her arms to him. Please, Richard. I'll do anything. I've changed, I've realized. You realized too late, he interrupted abruptly. I don't need a woman who remembers me only when her other plans have collapsed. I've found peace, Melissa. And I'm not going to lose him for your attempts to find yourself. He walked past her, leaving her alone in the dining room where the food was untouched. His words echoed in her head, and she realized that she had lost more than she could have imagined. Melissa remained standing in silence, realizing that her attempts to bring back the past had run into a cold reality. Now she had to decide how to move on when there was no turning back anymore. Melissa sat alone in the dark living room for a long time. After talking to Richard, she felt drained but not broken. Richard's rejection was painful, but it didn't mean the end of her life. She decided that she had to move on. With these thoughts, she picked up her phone and opened a conversation with Zach. His last messages were still on the screen, light and carefree words full of compliments and promises of adventure. She typed a short message. Zach, I want to meet. The answer came almost instantly. Of course, Melissa. Tomorrow at the same cafe as usual? The next morning, she spent more time than usual picking up clothes. She chose something casual but elegant, a light blouse and dark jeans that accentuated her figure. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, and light makeup added freshness to her face. Zach was already waiting for her when she entered the cafe. His smile, as charming as ever, warmed her for a moment. He waved his hand, inviting her to sit down at the table. You look amazing, Melissa, he said, leaning forward. I'm glad you wanted to see me. Melissa smiled, but her inner tension betrayed the nervous movement of her hands. Thanks, Zach. She hesitated, searching for words. I've been thinking about us a lot. About Paris. And about what happened next. Zach nodded slightly, looking at her with interest. And what did you decide? Melissa sighed. I want to give us a chance. You're right, I deserve to be happy. And I think we can find that happiness together. Zach leaned back in his chair, his smile slowly fading, giving way to a serious expression on his face. Melissa, he began, his voice softer but firm. I think you misunderstood what happened between us. What do you mean? What is it? She asked, her voice trembling. Paris was a wonderful moment. But it was a moment, you know? He looked at her intently. I never wanted anything serious. We were a good couple for a while, but I didn't make any long-term plans. Melissa felt her heart constrict. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. But you said you wanted to be with me, that you wanted to make me happy, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Zach shrugged slightly. I was saying what I felt at that moment. But life isn't just about moments, Melissa. It's more complicated than that. And to be honest, I'm not sure I can be the one you're looking for. I don't want to deceive you. She stared at him in silence, not knowing how to react. His words cut deeper than she expected. So it didn't mean anything? What is it? She finally asked, her voice trembling with suppressed anger and pain. Zach leaned forward, his face full of sincerity. It meant something. But it was temporary. I admire you, Melissa. You are an incredible woman. But I can't be the one you're looking for right now. Melissa felt her throat tighten. She stood up without saying a word and quickly headed for the exit. Zach was trying to say something, but she didn't care anymore. When she went outside, a cold wind hit her in the face, but she didn't even pay attention to it. Her hopes were dashed again, this time completely. She stopped at the nearest bench and sat down, covering her face with her hands. The same questions kept running through her head. How did she get to this point? Why did her choice always lead to disappointment? She was a strong woman, but now, for the first time in a long time, she felt truly broken. But deep down, she knew that despair was not the answer. Her life was not over, and she had to find a new path where happiness would not depend on other people. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.